A biker's fist slammed into a 93-year-old war veteran's jaw in a quiet café, sending him crashing into a wall of photographs. The thug laughed, not realizing he had just assaulted the father of Commander Callum Whitmore, the head of His Majesty's Royal Guard and one of the most dangerous men in Britain. Some say revenge is best served cold, but in Kingsbrook Vale, it was about to be served with royal precision. Before we dive into this thrilling tale of justice and revenge, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Hit that notification bell to never miss an upload. Now, let's begin. Thaddeus Thad. Whitmore's weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea at Hawthorne's Haven, a quaint café nestled in the heart of Kingsbrook Vale. The morning sun filtered through century-old windows, casting warm shadows across the polished oak tables and vintage photographs that lined the walls. At 93, Thad had earned every wrinkle on his face and every silver hair on his head. His Royal Air Force pin, worn proudly on his tweed jacket, caught the light as he raised the cup to his lips. Flora Hawthorne, the café's owner, approached his corner table with a fresh pot of tea. Her family had run this establishment since World War II, when Thad himself was flying Spitfires over the English Channel. "The usual scone, Mr. Whitmore?" she asked, her kind eyes crinkling at the corners. "Please, Flora," Thad smiled, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had seen both the best and worst of humanity. "And how many times must I tell you to call me Thad?" The café held memories in every corner, photographs of local heroes, including a younger Thad in his RAF uniform, shared wall space with more recent additions. Among them, a discreet image of his son Callum in his Royal Guard dress uniform, standing at attention beside His Majesty. Thad never boasted about his son's position. It wasn't his style, and in these uncertain times, discretion was more than courtesy. It was survival. Young Rosalie Rose Winters, the newest waitress, hurried over with fresh scones. Her hands trembled slightly as she set them down. "The Shadow Riders were asking about you yesterday, Mr. Whitmore," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "They seemed interested." Thad's expression didn't change, but his grip on the teacup tightened imperceptibly. The Shadow Riders, a notorious motorcycle gang that had been terrorizing Kingsbrook Vale for the past year. They weren't just common thugs. There were whispers of connections to international arms dealing and royal security breaches. "Let them ask, Rose," Thad replied calmly, though his military-trained eyes had already noted every exit and potential weapon in the room. Old habits that had kept him alive through 2 wars. A bunch of leather-clad boys on motorcycles doesn't compare to the Luftwaffe. Flora returned to his table, her usual cheerful demeanor clouded with concern. "They've been getting bolder, Thad. Just last week they forced the Jenkins family to close their shop. Something about protection money." She lowered her voice. Perhaps you should call Callum?" Thad shook his head. His son had enough responsibility protecting the crown without worrying about local troubles. Besides, Callum had warned him about maintaining a low profile. In his position, any connection could be exploited by those seeking to breach royal security. The familiar rumble of motorcycles cut through the morning quiet. Not the usual passing traffic. This was deliberate, threatening. The sound grew louder, then stopped directly outside Hawthorne's Haven. Flora's face paled, and Rose almost dropped her serving tray. Through the window, Thad counted 5 motorcycles, their riders dismounting with practiced arrogance. Their leader, Dominic Doomthorne, stood head and shoulders above the rest, his leather jacket adorned with patches that spoke of violence and territorial claims. Behind him, Axel the Raven Kestrel moved with the predatory grace of an ex-military man gone rogue. As they approached the café's entrance, Thad calmly set down his teacup and straightened his RAF pin. He had faced down Nazi fighters at 20,000 feet. He wouldn't flinch before common thugs in his own town. The bell above the door chimed, a gentle sound that now carried a warning of impending confrontation. The morning peace was about to shatter, and in Kingsbrook Vale the echoes would reach far beyond the walls of Hawthorne's Haven, all the way to the hallowed corridors of Windsor Crown Palace, where Commander Callum Whitmore was about to receive a phone call that would change everything. The Shadow Riders dominated the cafe's entrance, their leather jackets creaking as they spread out like wolves circling prey. The morning sunlight caught on Dominic Doomthorne's silver chain necklace, a coiled serpent with ruby eyes that matched the color of the fresh scar running down his left cheek. The other patrons seemed to shrink in their seats, some discreetly reaching for their phones, others avoiding eye contact entirely. Well, Doom's voice carried across the suddenly silent cafe, deep and gravelly. If it isn't the town's favorite war hero. He moved toward Thad's corner, each step deliberate, boots heavy against the wooden floor. Having a pleasant morning, old man? Flora Hawthorne stepped forward, trying to intercept. Mr. Thorne, please. This is a respectable establishment. Shut it. Axel, the raven kestrel, snapped, moving to block her path. His eyes, cold and calculating, never left Thad. The adults are talking. Thad set his teacup down with a gentle clink that somehow cut through the tension. Miss Hawthorne, he said calmly, I believe these gentlemen came to speak with me. His voice carried the same steady authority it had held when commanding RAF squadrons decades ago, though their manners leave much to be desired. Doom's lips curled into a sneer as he reached Thad's table. He planted his hands on the polished surface, leather gloves leaving marks on the wood. Behind him, 3 other riders, younger, eager to prove themselves, formed a loose semicircle. The message was clear. No escape. Manners? Doom chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. You want to talk about manners, old-timer? How about the manners of paying respect to those who run things around here? Thad's eyes, sharp despite his age, met Doom's gaze unflinchingly. I paid my respects to this town by defending it, and this country, while better men than you died for it. His hand brushed the RAF pin on his jacket. I don't owe anything to thugs who prey on their own community. The cafe grew even quieter, if possible. Rose had backed against the counter, her phone clutched in her trembling hand. Flora stood frozen, her eyes darting between Thad and the riders. The world's changed, old man. Doom straightened, his massive frame casting a shadow over Thad's table. Your war medals don't mean shit anymore. This is our town now, and everyone pays their dues, even decorated heroes. Thad's expression remained unchanged, but his mind was racing through scenarios, just as it had during countless dogfights. The exit was blocked. 5 opponents, likely armed. Civilians present. The heavy teapot within reach could serve as a weapon, but the risk to bystanders was too high. Your war stories, Doom continued, picking up Thad's teacup and examining it mockingly, don't pay for protection. And we'd hate to see anything happen to this lovely establishment. He let the cup drop, shattering on the floor. Flora gasped. Rose whimpered. But Thad didn't flinch. I fought real men in the war, Thad said, his voice carrying across the cafe. Men who believed in something, even if it was wrong. You? He looked around at the gang, his disdain evident. You're just boys playing dress-up, too cowardly to make an honest living. The Raven stepped forward, his hand moving to his jacket, but Doom held up a finger. His face had darkened, the scar seeming to pulse with his anger. You know? Doom leaned down, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I did some checking up on you, Thaddeus Whitmore. Distinguished service record. Medals for valor. Even got a son in some fancy position, don't you? Be a shame if something happened to tarnish that family legacy. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Thad's face. Not fear, but a cold anger that would have warned wiser men to retreat. The mention of his son, the implied threat, crossed a line. Young man, Thad said quietly, rising to his feet with deliberate slowness, you should choose your next words very carefully. Doom straightened, towering over Thad. Or what, Grandpa? You'll bore me to death with another story about... The punch came without warning. Thad might have been 93, but decades of keeping in shape and the muscle memory of combat training hadn't entirely faded. His fist connected with Doom's solar plexus, causing the larger man to stumble back, more from surprise than pain. For a moment, the café was absolutely still. Then Doom's face contorted with rage. "You senile old bastard," he snarled, and his massive fist swung in a vicious arc. The blow caught Thad on the jaw, sending him crashing into the wall of photographs. Frames shattered, glass tinkling to the floor as the 93-year-old veteran collapsed among the fragments of his own history. Flora screamed. Rose's phone clattered to the floor, and somewhere in the chaos, a text message was sent. A message that would reach Windsor Crown Palace within minutes. Doom stood over Thad, rubbing his knuckles. "Consider that your first and last warning," he spat. "Next time, we won't be so gentle." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "And if you're thinking of calling the police," he smiled coldly, "remember, we know about your son. Be a shame if someone looked into his position a little too closely." As the Shadow Riders turned to leave, their laughter echoing in the stunned silence, none of them noticed Rose's phone on the floor. Its screen displaying a simple message sent to an emergency contact. "Commander Whitmore, they hurt your father. Hawthorne's Haven. Please, hurry." And in the halls of Windsor Crown Palace, Commander Callum Whitmore's phone buzzed with a notification that would set in motion events none of the Shadow Riders could have anticipated. Commander Callum Whitmore stood rigid in Windsor Crown Palace's secure command center, his immaculate Royal Guard uniform reflecting the blue glow of surveillance monitors. His hand gripped his phone so tightly the device creaked in protest. The message from Rose blazed on the screen, each word igniting a fury he hadn't felt since his Special Forces days. "Sir?" Lieutenant Harrison approached cautiously, noting his commander's unusual tension. "The security briefing for His Majesty's upcoming..." "Postpone it." Callum's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Get me everything we have on a gang called the Shadow Riders, operating in Kingsbrook Vale." Harrison blinked, thrown by the sudden shift. "Sir, with all due respect, local gang activity isn't within our jurisdiction. The Metropolitan Police... They attacked my father." Callum turned, his eyes carrying a dangerous intensity that made Harrison step back. A 93-year-old veteran, in broad daylight. His jaw clenched. "And they made the mistake of mentioning my position here." The command center fell silent. Everyone knew Commander Whitmore's reputation. Before leading the Royal Guard, he had served in the SAS, conducting operations that remained heavily classified. His appointment to protect the royal family hadn't been a political choice. It had been recognition of his particular set of skills. "Pull up the CCTV feeds from Kingsbrook Vale," Callum ordered, moving to the main monitoring station. "Last hour, focus on Hawthorne's Haven and surrounding streets." "Sir," Inspector Evelyn Eve Sinclair from Royal Intelligence stepped forward, tablet in hand. "The Shadow Riders have been on our radar. They're not just common thugs." She swiped through several files. "We suspect connections to international arms dealing, possibly even attempts to breach royal security protocols." Callum's expression darkened. "Explain." 3 months ago, we intercepted communications suggesting they were gathering intelligence on royal protection routes," Eve continued. "We thought they were just ambitious locals, but their leader, Dominic Doomthorne," she pulled up a photograph, "former private military contractor, specialized in security penetration." The surveillance feeds came alive, showing multiple angles of the Shadow Riders arriving at Hawthorne's Haven. Callum watched in cold fury as the scene unfolded. The moment his father was struck, his hand curled into a fist. "Their second in command," Eve added. "Axel the Raven Kestrel, dishonorable discharge from Special Forces, known for detailed planning and extreme violence." "Sir," Harrison interjected, "if they're truly involved in threats to royal security, we have jurisdiction. But we need to proceed carefully. Any direct action could compromise..." "They compromised themselves the moment they touched my father." Callum's voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made everyone in the room tense. "And threatened to expose royal security details." He turned to Eve. "I want everything. Safe houses, meeting points, financial trails. If they so much as parked illegally, I want to know about it. Already compiling, Eve nodded. But there's more. Chancellor Reginald Blackthorne has been seen meeting with known Shadow Rider associates. We suspect high-level protection. Callum absorbed this information, his tactical mind already formulating plans. A corrupt government official, international arms dealers, and threats to both his family and the crown. The threads were connecting, forming a web of corruption that reached higher than a simple local gang. "Harrison," he commanded, "I'm taking personal leave. Effective immediately." "Sir, the royal family's security will remain absolute," Callum finished. "Deputy Commander Phillips is more than capable. This is personal." He paused at one of the monitors, watching as his father was helped to his feet by Flora Hawthorne. Even through the grainy footage, he could see Thad refusing assistance, his military bearing intact despite the assault. "Eve, I need secure transport to Kingsbrook Vale, under the radar." "Already arranged," she replied. "Unmarked vehicle waiting in the lower garage." "And sir?" She handed him a secure tablet. "Complete dossier on Shadow Rider operations, including some unofficial options for dealing with them." Callum nodded, appreciating her initiative. "Harrison maintains standard protocols here. If anyone asks, family emergency," Harrison confirmed. "Nothing more." As Callum strode toward the exit, Eve called after him. "Sir, they're dangerous and well-connected." He paused at the door, and for a moment, his composed demeanor cracked, revealing the lethal operator beneath the polished uniform. "So am I." In the secure garage, Callum changed into civilian clothes, though his bearing would never be truly civilian. The tablet from Eve revealed a complex network of criminal activities, weapons shipments disguised as legitimate cargo, blackmail operations targeting officials, and systematic intimidation of local businesses. As he started the unmarked vehicle, his phone buzzed again. A message from Flora Hawthorne. "Your father refused medical attention. He's home now, but they threatened to return. Please hurry." Callum's response was brief. "Keep him safe. I'm coming." The drive to Kingsbrook Vale would take 2 hours. 2 hours to plan, to prepare, to let his cold fury crystallize into something focused and deadly. The Shadow Riders had made 3 critical mistakes. They had attacked a veteran who had risked everything for his country. They had threatened to expose sensitive royal security information. They had done both to the wrong man's father. As Windsor Crown Palace disappeared in his rearview mirror, Callum allowed himself a grim smile. The Shadow Riders thought they were predators in Kingsbrook Vale. They were about to learn what it meant to be hunted by someone trained to protect the crown. In Kingsbrook Vale, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, a fitting backdrop for the reckoning that was coming. The sun was setting over Kingsbrook Vale when Callum's unmarked vehicle pulled into the gravel driveway of his father's Victorian cottage. The house stood as it always had, proud, resilient, much like its owner. Through the front window, warm light spilled onto the carefully tended garden where Thad still grew the roses his late wife had loved. Callum's trained eyes swept the perimeter before he stepped out. Nothing obvious, but there were signs. Cigarette butts by the gate that hadn't been there during his last visit. Slight impressions in the grass where someone had stood watching. The Shadow Riders had been keeping surveillance. The front door opened before he reached it. Thad stood in the doorway, straight back despite the angry bruise darkening his jaw. Father and son locked eyes, decades of unspoken understanding passing between them. "You didn't need to come," Thad said firmly, though his eyes betrayed relief at seeing his son. "Tea?" Callum asked, ignoring the statement as he stepped inside. "Already brewing." A ghost of a smile crossed Thad's face. Some things don't change. The cottage's interior was a testament to a life well lived. Military photographs and medals shared space with family portraits. A recent one showed Callum in his full Royal Guard ceremonial uniform, standing beside his father at Buckingham Palace. Beside it, an older image, Thad in his RAF uniform, young and fierce, standing by his Spitfire. In the kitchen, Thad poured tea with steady hands while Callum leaned against the counter, his casual stance belying his combat-ready awareness. The bruise on his father's face looked worse in the kitchen's bright light. Tell me everything, Callum said quietly. From the beginning. Thad sat at the kitchen table, cradling his teacup. They're not just thugs, son. The way they move, the way they gather intelligence, they're military, or were. I know about Thorne and Kestrel, Callum nodded. What else? They've been watching me for weeks. Not just me. Anyone with connections to local authority, or... Thad met his son's eyes meaningfully. Higher positions. Callum's phone buzzed. A message from Eve. Chancellor Blackthorne just made a large withdrawal. Meeting scheduled at the Iron Horse pub. 1 hour. They mentioned your position, Thad continued, his voice hardening. Seemed to know details they shouldn't. They're part of something bigger, Callum confirmed, showing his father the tablet with Eve's intelligence. Arms dealing, security breaches, corruption reaching into government. Thad studied the information, his military experience adding weight to his assessment. The weapons shipments, he pointed to a manifest. They're using old RAF routes that aren't on current maps. Callum leaned forward. How would they know those? Someone's feeding them classified information. Someone who has access to historical military archives. Thad's expression darkened. And current royal security protocols. A knock at the door interrupted them. Both men tensed, but Callum relaxed slightly at the distinctive pattern. 3 quick taps, a pause, too slow. Inspector Eve Sinclair stepped inside, her business suit unable to completely hide her military bearing. Commander, Mr. Whitmore. She nodded to both men. We have movement. She spread photographs across the kitchen table. Shadow riders gathering at multiple locations, they're mobilizing. They're expecting us to react, Callum mused, studying the images. Setting up for an ambush? Likely, Eve agreed. But that's not all. Chancellor Blackthorne just made some interesting calls. He's nervous, making mistakes. The Iron Horse meeting, Thad noted, recognizing the pub in one photo. It's an old spot. Used to be popular with RAF officers during the war. Good sight lines, multiple exits. And now it's Shadow Rider territory, Eve added. Our intelligence suggests they're moving something big. Whatever operation they're planning, it's happening soon. Callum's mind raced through scenarios, analyzing angles and contingencies. They'll be watching all official channels. Local police? Compromised, Eve confirmed. At least 3 officers on their payroll, and the Chancellor's influence means no official action without his approval. Then we work unofficial channels, Callum decided. He turned to his father. I need you to stay here. No. Thad's voice was firm. I fought Nazis at 20,000 feet. I'm not hiding from thugs in my own home. Dad. They threatened my son. Thad cut him off. They threatened the crown. And they did it thinking an old man wouldn't fight back. He stood, and for a moment, Callum saw the young RAF pilot in his father's stance. I still remember every classified route they're using, every hidden airfield and emergency landing strip. Knowledge they shouldn't have. Eve's phone chirped. New intelligence, she reported. Shadow riders moving weapons through old RAF tunnels, system that's not on modern maps. I know those tunnels, Thad said quietly. Flew missions laying their foundations. The main line runs right under the Iron Horse. Callum looked at his father for a long moment, then nodded slowly. We do this smart, no unnecessary risks. Wouldn't dream of it, Thad smiled grimly. Remember who taught you chess, son? Eve laid out more photographs. Chancellor Blackthorne's meeting is our window. Whatever they're planning, he's the key. Then we spring their trap, Callum decided. But on our terms. He turned to Eve. How many people can you trust absolutely? 3, all ex-special forces now in Royal Intelligence. Get them here, quietly. Callum studied the pub's layout. Dad, those tunnels. Any access points they might not know about? Thad's eyes lit with a familiar tactical gleam. Several, and a few other surprises from the war years. Good. Callum straightened, his Royal Guard commander's authority evident in every movement. Because in 1 hour, We're going to remind the Shadow Riders why threatening the crown and its defenders is a fatal mistake. Outside, thunder rolled across Kingsbrook Vale. A storm was coming, in more ways than one. The Iron Horse pub sat like a weathered sentinel at the edge of Kingsbrook Vale, its Victorian architecture a testament to times long past. As evening shadows lengthened, 3 unmarked vehicles took strategic positions around the neighborhood. Inside each, members of Eve's trusted Royal Intelligence team waited silently, their weapons concealed but ready. Commander Callum Whitmore stood in the sealed-off map room of his father's cottage, studying the classified wartime documents Thad had maintained in pristine condition. Yellowed papers and faded blueprints covered the ancient oak table, each one revealing secrets about the tunnel network beneath Kingsbrook Vale. Here, Thad traced a line on the oldest map, his finger following a passage that didn't appear on modern surveys. Emergency evacuation route. Connects to the pub's wine cellar through a false wall. Haven't been opened since '45. Eve studied the route intently. Security cameras show the Shadow Riders using this entrance. She pointed to a more obvious access point. They don't know about the emergency exit. They're confident, Callum noted, his voice carrying the calm certainty of a man who had faced worse odds. Too confident. That makes them vulnerable. His phone buzzed. A secure message from one of Eve's operatives. Chancellor Blackthorne's car spotted leaving London, ETA 30 minutes, heavy security detail. He's scared, Eve observed, reading the message, running to his protection instead of from it. Thad adjusted his RAF pin, the bruise on his face now a badge of determination rather than victimhood. Fear makes men predictable, makes them rush, make mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, Eve pulled up new surveillance footage on her tablet. The grainy video showed Doom and the Raven entering the Iron Horse, followed by several heavily armed men trying too hard to look casual. They're fortifying their position. At least 12 men inside, probably more in the tunnels. Callum's eyes narrowed as he spotted something in the footage. Pause it. There. He pointed to a figure in the background. That's Roland Dusk Ashworth, former Royal Protection Squad. Dismissed for suspicious conduct around secure documents. The source of their intelligence on royal security protocols, Eve confirmed grimly. And their connection to the Chancellor, Thad added. Ashworth worked on his security detail before joining the Royal Protection Squad. Thunder rolled overhead as rain began to fall, drumming against the cottage's windows. Callum checked his secure phone one last time. Strike teams in position? Eve nodded. Team 1 covering the main entrance. Team 2 on the known tunnel access. Team 3 mobile, ready to cut off any escape routes. Good. Callum turned to his father. You remember the plan? You stay with Team 3. No heroics. Thad's expression was unreadable. Wouldn't dream of it. But Callum knew his father too well. I mean it, Dad. These men, Thad interrupted quietly, threatened my son. Threatened the crown I spent my life defending, and they did it thinking an old man would just take it. He straightened to his full height, and for a moment, the decorated RAF pilot overshadowed the elderly veteran. I know the risks. I also know those tunnels better than anyone alive. Before Callum could respond, Eve's phone lit up with urgent messages. Movement at the pub, large vehicle arriving through the back alley, weapons being unloaded. Callum checked his tactical gear one last time. The lightweight body armor was concealed beneath civilian clothes, and his sidearm was secured in a shoulder holster. He carried other tools of his trade, tools that had served him well in operations that would never appear in any official record. Remember, he addressed both Eve and his father, we need evidence. Proof of the Chancellor's involvement, confirmation of the security breaches. We do this by the book. Mostly by the book, Eve amended, checking her own weapon. Mostly, Callum agreed with a grim smile. Teams 1 and 2 move on my signal. We let them start their meeting. Let them feel secure. Thad moved to the window, watching the rain intensify. Weather works in our favor. Poor visibility, sound coverage. Just like your flying days? Eve asked. Better, Thad replied. Back then I had to worry about being shot down. Tonight? He turned to face them, and his eyes held a dangerous gleam. "Tonight, we're the ones hunting." Callum's phone vibrated. Chancellor Blackthorne's car had been spotted entering Kingsbrook Vale. The operation was about to begin. "Time to move," Callum announced. "Dad—" I know, Thad cut him off. "Stay with Team 3, though I should mention—" He moved to an old chest in the corner and opened it, revealing carefully preserved equipment. "I kept some insurance from the old days. Inside lay several small devices, their purpose clear to anyone with military experience. Tunnel warfare tools," Thad explained, "for dealing with Nazi infiltrators. Still functional if we need options." Callum studied the devices, then his father. Years of commanding the Royal Guard had taught him to recognize valuable assets, regardless of their age. "Team 3 could use an expert on tunnel systems," he said finally. "Strictly advisory." Thad's slight smile spoke volumes. They moved out into the rain, separating into their assigned positions. The Iron Horse pub's windows glowed warmly, a deceptively inviting sight. Inside, the Shadow Riders were preparing for a meeting that they thought would secure their power. Instead, they were about to face the combined force of Royal Guard training, Special Forces expertise, and a veteran's intimate knowledge of their battlefield. As Callum took his position, watching Chancellor Blackthorne's car approach through the rain, he allowed himself a moment of cold satisfaction. The Shadow Riders had made a fundamental mistake. They had assumed that age and position had softened their targets. They were about to learn that some men, like his father, never stopped being warriors, and others, like himself, had simply gotten better at concealing their lethal capabilities. The storm intensified, nature providing a perfect cover for the operation about to unfold. In the darkness, Team 1 signaled ready, Team 2 confirmed position, and Team 3, with Thad Whitmore's quiet guidance, prepared to remind the Shadow Riders why some legends were best left unquestioned. Rain hammered against the Iron Horse's ancient windows as Chancellor Reginald Blackthorne hurried inside, flanked by 2 private security guards. His expensive suit was already soaked, and his normally composed face showed signs of strain. The pub's interior was dimly lit, heavy curtains drawn against the storm, and the usual patrons were conspicuously absent. Dominic Doom. Thorne sat at a corner table, his massive frame casting a shadow in the pub's low light. The Raven stood nearby, his cold eyes tracking every movement while other Shadow Riders maintained a perimeter. The bruises on Doom's knuckles, from his encounter with Thad, were still visible. Outside, concealed by the storm, Callum watched through a high-powered scope. His earpiece crackled softly. "Team 1 in position," Eve's voice came through, spotting 4 armed men at the main entrance. "Team 2 ready," another voice confirmed. "Tunnel access secured." "Team 3 standing by." The final acknowledgement came, followed by Thad's quiet addition, "Alternative route confirmed." Through the scope, Callum observed the meeting unfold. Chancellor Blackthorne removed his wet coat, revealing a shoulder holster. Unusual for a government official. The man was scared, and scared men made mistakes. "You're late," Doom's voice carried through the directional microphone Eve's team had planted earlier. "And you brought uninvited guests." "Insurance," Blackthorne replied, gesturing to his guards. "After what happened at Hawthorne's Haven, I'm not taking chances." Doom's laugh was without humor. "Worried about one old man?" "Worried about his son," Blackthorne snapped. "Do you have any idea who you provoked? Commander Whitmore isn't just Royal Guard, he's their best. Former SAS. Operations so classified even I can't access the files." "All the more reason to accelerate our timeline," the Raven interjected. "The weapons are ready, the buyers are waiting, and our friend in royal protection has provided everything we need." In his concealed position, Callum's jaw tightened. Through his earpiece, he heard his father's soft intake of breath. Roland Dusk Ashworth emerged from the shadows, carrying a leather briefcase. "Complete security protocols," he announced, placing it on the table. "Transportation routes, safe house locations, emergency procedures, everything needed to breach royal protection." "Confirmation of treason," Eve whispered through the comm. "Moving to record." Callum watched as Chancellor Blackthorne examined the documents, his hands trembling slightly. "This goes beyond our arrangement," the politician protested. "Simple weapons trafficking is one thing, but this is why you're being paid so well," Doom cut him off. "The weapons are just a bonus. The real money comes from selling royal security details to the highest bidder." Thunder crashed overhead as Blackthorne ran a hand through his silver hair. "If this gets out..." "It won't," the Raven assured him coldly. "Unless you're having second thoughts." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Blackthorne glanced at his guards, then back at the documents. "The payment. Show me." Doom nodded to one of his men, who brought forward a metal briefcase. Inside, stacks of bearer bonds gleamed under the pub's lights. "Team 1, Callum whispered into his comm. "Prepare to..." A sudden noise from the cellar interrupted his command. Through his scope, he saw the Raven's head snap toward the sound. 2 Shadow Riders moved to investigate. "We've got movement in the tunnels," Team 2 reported urgently. "Multiple signatures approaching from the North Passage." Callum's mind raced. This wasn't part of the plan. "Status?" "Unknown contacts," came the response. "Not our people." Inside, the Raven leaned close to Doom. "We've got company." "Your men?" Doom asked Blackthorne, who shook his head. "Police?" the Raven suggested. "No," Dusk said grimly, checking his phone. "My contact says local police are still at their station. This is someone else." Through his scope, Callum watched the situation deteriorate. More Shadow Riders were moving toward the cellar, weapons drawn. Chancellor Blackthorne was reaching for his shoulder holster. "Sir," Eve's voice was tense, "if there's another player, we need to move now." But before Callum could respond, his father's calm voice came through the comm. "Wait." In the pub's cellar, the 2 Shadow Riders moved cautiously through the wine racks, their weapons ready. The tunnel entrance was secured, or should have been. Suddenly, a metallic clinking sound echoed through the cellar. One of the riders bent down, picking up what looked like an old mechanical device. Up in his position, Thad Whitmore smiled grimly. "World War II tunnel alarm," he explained through the comm. "Still works perfectly." The device activated with a sharp hiss, releasing a cloud of harmless but disorienting smoke, another relic from Thad's RAF days. The Shadow Riders stumbled back, coughing and confused. "Now!" Callum commanded. The operation exploded into action. Team 1 breached the main entrance while Team 2 emerged from their hidden position near the tunnel access. Eve's operators moved with precision born of years of training, their weapons trained on specific targets. Chancellor Blackthorne's guards reached for their weapons, but froze as red laser sights danced across their chests. The Shadow Riders, caught between teams, found themselves in a tactical nightmare. "Royal Intelligence!" Eve's voice rang out. "Everyone on the ground!" But Doom and the Raven were already moving, diving for cover as gunfire erupted. Dusk grabbed the briefcase of security documents and bolted toward the cellar. "Target moving to tunnels," Team 2 reported. "Let him go," Callum ordered, already moving from his position. That's what the alternative route is for. In the chaos, Chancellor Blackthorne tried to slip away but found himself face to face with the barrel of Eve's weapon. "Going somewhere, sir?" she asked coldly. Outside, Callum reached the hidden tunnel entrance his father had revealed, the one not on any modern map. As he prepared to enter, Thad's voice came through his comm. "North Junction, second right. It'll put you ahead of them." "Copy," Callum acknowledged. "Team 3? "Ready and waiting," came the response. "With a special advisor who knows every inch of these tunnels." Callum allowed himself a small smile as he disappeared into the darkness. The Shadow Riders thought they knew these tunnels. They were about to learn the difference between reading old maps and living the history they represented. The tunnels beneath Kingsbrook Vale were a maze of history, their brick walls still bearing scorch marks from World War II. Water dripped steadily from decades-old pipes, and the air carried the musty weight of secrets long buried. Callum moved through the darkness with practiced silence, his tactical light cutting through the gloom in controlled sweeps. Through his earpiece, he could hear the operation continuing above ground. Eve had secured Chancellor Blackthorne and most of the Shadow Riders, but Doom, the Raven, and Dusk had escaped into the tunnel network with the classified documents. Target movement, Team 2 reported. 3 signatures heading east through the main passage. 4 more following. Another operator added, armed and moving fast. Callum reached a junction, ancient arrows painted on the walls still visible under layers of grime. His father's voice came through calm and certain. Left passage. Follow the red markings. They'll be taking the main tunnel. More obvious, but it's a trap. Explain, Callum whispered, already moving. Those tunnels were designed to channel German infiltrators into killing zones, Thad replied. Natural bottlenecks, false exits. Your friends are walking right into one. In the main tunnel, Doom, the Raven, and Dusk moved quickly, their own lights bouncing off wet walls. Behind them, their remaining men followed, covering their retreat. They thought they were escaping. They were being herded. Commander? Eve's voice crackled through the comm. Chancellor Blackthorne is talking. The documents they're carrying. It's worse than we thought. Complete breakdown of royal security, including details of an upcoming state visit. Not just security protocols, Thad added grimly. Those tunnels they're using? They run under 3 potential royal routes, perfect for an ambush. Callum processed this as he navigated the narrow passages. The Shadow Riders weren't just selling information, they were setting up for something bigger, something that would compromise royal security at the highest level. Ahead, he heard voices echoing off the walls. This isn't right, Dusk was saying, his voice tense. These tunnels don't match my intel. Your intel? The Raven snarled. The old man's son is Royal Guard. They know we're down here. We need to split up. Nobody splits up, Doom commanded. We stay together until… A metallic clinking sound interrupted him. Something rolled across the tunnel floor, stopping at their feet. Down! The Raven shouted, but too late. Another of Thad's vintage devices activated, filling the tunnel with dense smoke. Confused shouts and coughing echoed through the passages. Now, son! Thad's voice came through crisp and clear. Second tunnel on your right. It'll put you right behind them. Callum moved swiftly, years of special operations experience guiding him through the darkness. The smoke was already dissipating, drawn away by the tunnel's ancient ventilation system, another detail only a veteran like Thad would know. He emerged behind the Shadow Riders just as they were regaining their bearings. Doom's massive frame was silhouetted against their scattered lights, the briefcase clutched in one hand, a heavy pistol in the other. Drop it! Callum's voice cut through the tunnel like a blade. The Shadow Riders spun, weapons raising, but Callum had already mapped their positions. His first shot took down one of their supporting gunmen. His second knocked the weapon from another's hand. The Raven dove for cover, returning fire. Bullets sparked off the ancient brickwork as Callum rolled, coming up behind a support pillar. Doom's gun roared in the confined space, the sound deafening. Team 3, moving into position, came the call through his earpiece, followed by his father's steady voice. Tunnel collapse mechanism still operational. Just say the word. Not yet, Callum responded, squeezing off another shot that sent the Raven scrambling back. Need those documents secure first. Dusk, seeing an opportunity, broke away from the group, running deeper into the tunnel network. He still had copies of the security protocols. Letting him escape wasn't an option. Runner heading east, Callum reported, engaging Doom and the Raven to keep them pinned. Copy that, Thad replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. Team 3, prepare for guest. Tunnel exit in 30 meters. Dusk ran through the darkness, his light bouncing wildly off the walls. He could see an exit ahead, a faint glow promising escape. He burst through and found himself facing 3 operators from Team 3, their weapons trained center mass. And beside them, standing calmly with his RAF pin gleaming in the low light, was Thaddeus Whitmore. Going somewhere? Thad asked pleasantly. Back in the main tunnel, Doom realized their position was collapsing. Raven, fall back to secondary exit. There is no secondary exit, Callum called out, his voice echoing off the walls. "Not anymore." As if to emphasize his point, a deep rumbling filled the tunnel. Decades-old mechanisms, maintained in secret by veterans who understood their value, groaned to life. A section of the tunnel behind the Shadow Riders began to collapse, blocks of brick and earth creating an impassable barrier. "It's over." Callum stepped into view, his weapon trained steadily on Doom. "The only way out is through me." Doom's face contorted with rage. He raised his gun, skull ring glinting on his trigger finger, the same hand that had struck Thad at Hawthorne's haven. Callum's shot was precise, striking Doom's hand. The gang leader's weapon clattered to the ground as he howled in pain. The Raven, seeing his leader fall, made one last desperate attempt, charging forward with a combat knife. 3 shots rang out. The Raven collapsed, his blade clattering harmlessly against the tunnel floor. "Target secured," Callum reported calmly, keeping his weapon trained on Doom as he retrieved the briefcase. "Documents recovered. Tunnel network compromised but contained." "Well done, son." Thad's voice carried a note of pride. "Although, you might want to hurry. These old tunnels aren't as stable as they used to be." As if on cue, another rumble echoed through the passages. Decades of waiting had made the collapse mechanisms a bit too eager. "Team 3, clear the tunnels," Callum ordered, securing Doom with tactical restraints. "Eve, prepare for prisoner transport. Multiple packages for delivery." As he led his captives toward the exit, Callum allowed himself a grim smile. The Shadow Riders had thought themselves hunters, using these old tunnels for their operations. They never realized they were walking through history maintained by men like his father, who understood that some weapons never truly went out of date. Above ground, the storm was beginning to clear. The storm had passed, leaving Kingsbrook Vale glistening under breaking clouds. Dawn was approaching as an unmarked convoy pulled into a secure Royal Intelligence facility on the outskirts of London. Inside the lead vehicle, Commander Callum Whitmore sat across from Eve, both studying the contents of the recovered briefcase. "This goes deeper than we thought," Eve said, spreading documents across the small workspace. "The Shadow Riders were just middlemen. Look at these account traces." Callum examined the papers, his expression darkening. International wire transfers, offshore accounts, and coded communications revealed a network far more extensive than a local gang's operations. "Multiple buyers," he noted, "all interested in royal security details." The Chancellor wasn't just corrupted, he was positioned. "Like a chess piece," Thad's voice came from the back seat, where he sat watching the countryside roll by. "Place your players early, activate them when needed." In separate vehicles behind them, their prisoners rode in secured silence. Doom's hand was bandaged, his previous arrogance replaced by cold fury. The Raven, treated for his wounds, had already begun talking, hoping to bargain. Chancellor Blackthorne sat in shock, his political career in ruins. Eve's tablet chirped with incoming intelligence. "Sir, you need to see this." She handed him the device. Facial recognition just matched one of Doom's contacts, former intelligence operative, now working for a private military corporation. "Atlas Security Group," Callum read, his eyes narrowing. "I know them. They've bid on royal protection contracts before." "And been rejected," Eve added. "Apparently they decided to create their own opportunities." The convoy turned into the facility's underground garage, heavy gates closing behind them. As they stepped out, Eve's phone buzzed with urgent messages. "Multiple raids in progress," she reported. "MI5 is moving on Atlas Security's offices. Interpol has their international teammates. The web's coming apart." Thad watched as their prisoners were led away by armed guards. "They thought they were clever," he mused, "using old war tunnels, studying royal routes. Never realized they were reading a book while we wrote it." In the facility's operational center, screens displayed real-time updates from raids across Europe. Atlas Security's network was unraveling, their carefully constructed scheme exposed by a single briefcase of documents. "Commander," a young analyst approached with a tablet, "we've decoded more of their communications. The state visit wasn't their only target. They had plans for 3 separate operations." Callum reviewed the intelligence, his military training highlighting the implications. They were going to sell access to the highest bidders, create gaps in security, then exploit them. Using Chancellor Blackthorne's influence to clear their paths, Eve added, and the Shadow Riders as deniable assets. Speaking of our friends, Thad nodded toward a monitor showing the interrogation rooms. The Raven was talking animatedly, while Doom sat in stony silence. Kestrel's giving us everything, Eve confirmed. Locations, contacts, the whole operation. Doom's not so cooperative. He doesn't need to be, Callum replied. We have enough to bury them all. A secure line buzzed, Windsor Crown Palace requesting an update. Callum stepped into a private room to take the call, leaving Eve and Thad watching the operation unfold. Your son, Eve said quietly to Thad. He's good at this. He should be. Thad smiled slightly. He had good teachers. Speaking of which, he pulled an old worn notebook from his jacket. Those tunnel mechanisms might need maintenance. The blueprints should be properly archived. Eve took the notebook carefully, recognizing its value. Decades of notes, modifications, and secrets that had helped bring down a criminal enterprise. I'll make sure it's handled properly, sir. Callum returned, his posture slightly more relaxed. Palace is satisfied. Security protocols are being updated, and Atlas Security's attempts to infiltrate royal protection have been completely compromised. And our local problem? Thad asked. The Shadow Riders are finished. Local police are moving on their remaining properties, with solid evidence of their activities. Kingsbrook Vale can breathe again. Eve's tablet displayed new information. Atlas Security's CEO just been taken into custody in Geneva. Their entire board is being questioned. Chancellor Blackthorne's contacts in government are being investigated. And to think, Thad mused, it all started with a punch in a café. They made a fundamental mistake, Callum said, standing beside his father. They thought age made you vulnerable, never realized they were attacking a legacy. Speaking of legacy, Eve interjected, Flora Hawthorne sent a message. The cafe's morning crowd wants to know if their favorite veteran will be returning for his usual tea. Thad straightened his RAF pin. Wouldn't miss it, though I suspect it'll be quieter now. I'll drive you, Callum offered. After all this, I could use a proper cup of tea myself. As they prepared to leave, Eve handed Callum a final report. Sir, about Atlas Security's remaining assets. Track them all, he ordered. Every account, every contact. This isn't over until we've pulled every thread. And the tunnels? Seal them, Thad suggested. But keep the blueprints. History has a way of becoming useful again. Outside, the sun was rising over London, casting long shadows across the facility's walls. In interrogation rooms below, criminals who had thought themselves untouchable were learning the cost of underestimating their opponents. In offices across Europe, their associates were discovering that their carefully constructed schemes had been unraveled by an old veteran and his son. As they drove back toward Kingsbrook Vale, Thad watched the countryside roll by. You know, he said thoughtfully, in the war, we had a saying, the most dangerous weapon is the one you don't see coming. Callum glanced at his father, noting the fading bruise on his jaw, a mark of defiance that had led to the collapse of an international criminal conspiracy. They saw the uniform, he agreed. The position, the authority, never saw the warriors underneath. Their mistake, Thad smiled, his RAF pin catching the morning light. Tea? Tea, Callum confirmed, turning toward Hawthorne's Haven, where Flora would be opening for the morning crowd, where an old veteran's corner booth would be waiting, as it always had. Some battles were fought with guns and tactics, others with patience and cunning. But the most satisfying victories, they both knew, were best celebrated with a proper cup of tea. Hawthorne's Haven was already bustling when Callum and Thad arrived. The morning sun streamed through freshly cleaned windows, and the aroma of baked scones filled the air. Flora Hawthorne stood behind the counter, her face lighting up as the two men entered. "Mr. Whitmore! Commander!" she called out, already reaching for Thad's preferred teacup. "Your usual corner is waiting." The other patrons, regulars who had witnessed the confrontation days before, watched with quiet respect as father and son made their way to the corner booth. The wall of photographs had been repaired, each frame carefully restored to its place, including the image of Thad in his RAF uniform and Callum in his Royal Guard dress blues. "Quite a change from your last visit," Rosalie observed, bringing over a fresh pot of Earl Grey. Her hands were steady now, her smile genuine. News of the Shadow Rider's downfall had spread quickly through Kingsbrook Vale. "Indeed," Thad agreed, settling into his familiar seat. "Though I must say the tea tastes even better today." As Rose poured their cups, Flora approached with a newspaper. The headline was discreet but clear. "Major security firm implicated in international investigation." Below, smaller print mentioned the arrest of various officials and the disruption of a criminal enterprise in Kingsbrook Vale. "They're not naming names," Flora noted, "but everyone knows. The Shadow Rider's clubhouse is being cleared out as we speak." Through the window, Callum could see increased police presence on the streets, not from fear, but from renewed confidence. The corrupt officers had been identified and removed, allowing their honest colleagues to reclaim their authority. "Commander," Eve's voice came through his discreet earpiece. "Update from London. Atlas Security's encrypted servers have been cracked. We're finding connections to similar operations in 3 other countries." "Maintain surveillance," Callum replied quietly. "Let's make sure we haven't missed anything." Thad sipped his tea, watching the morning unfold outside. Shopkeepers were opening their businesses without fear, children walked to school without hurrying, and the general atmosphere of tension had lifted from the town like morning mist. "Your mother would have loved this," Thad said suddenly, his voice soft with memory. "She always said a proper cup of tea could solve any problem. She also said the solution usually involved someone being too stubborn to back down." Callum smiled, remembering. Flora returned with fresh scones, settling into a chair beside them. The morning rush had eased, allowing for a moment of conversation. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice carrying the weight of months of worry. "The immediate threat is," Callum confirmed. "The Shadow Riders are finished. Their international backers are being rounded up. Chancellor Blackthorne and his corrupt network are facing serious charges. And the royal security concerns? Being addressed at the highest levels," Callum assured her. "Every compromise has been identified and corrected. New protocols are being implemented." Thad placed his teacup down with deliberate precision. "But that's not what you're really asking, is it, Flora?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "The town. We let them take control so easily. We should have fought back sooner." "Fear is a powerful weapon," Thad replied gently. "It paralyzes, makes good people doubt themselves. The real victory isn't just removing the threat. It's helping people remember their own strength." As if to emphasize his point, the door chimed, and Inspector Lucas Sterling entered. The local police chief had been instrumental in identifying corrupt officers once the investigation began. "Commander Mr. Whitmore," he nodded respectfully. "Thought you'd like to know. We've finished securing the tunnel network. Royal engineers are handling the final sealing procedures." "Good," Callum approved. "Those passages served their purpose, but some secrets are best left in the past." "Speaking of secrets," Eve's voice came through his earpiece again. "Chancellor Blackthorne is ready to make a full statement. His testimony will implicate several other officials who were part of Atlas Security's network." The morning continued peacefully, a stark contrast to the violence of days before. Customers came and went, many stopping to greet Thad with newfound respect. The veteran who had stood against the Shadow Riders had become something of a local legend. "You realize," Callum said to his father, "they'll be telling this story for years. The day a biker gang learned the hard way not to underestimate a 93-year-old veteran." "And his son," Thad added with a slight smile. "Though I suspect the official reports will be somewhat less dramatic." Flora refilled their cups, her movements unhurried and confident. "Will you be heading back to London soon, Commander?" "Shortly," Callum confirmed. "There's still work to be done, loose ends to tie up." "But first," Thad interjected, "I believe I'm owed a few proper morning teas without interruption." Through the window, they could see Royal Intelligence vehicles discreetly positioned around town, ensuring the last phases of the operation proceeded smoothly. The Shadow Rider's reign of terror had ended not with a dramatic shootout in the streets, but with the quiet efficiency of justice properly served. "You know," Flora said thoughtfully, "when they first arrived, the Shadow Riders, they seemed unstoppable, like we were powerless against them. Funny how things change." "Not funny at all," Thad corrected gently. "Simply a reminder that true strength isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment." Callum's phone buzzed with a message from Windsor Crown Palace, a brief but clear commendation for his handling of the situation. The royal family's security had been preserved, a major threat neutralized, and it had all begun with a single act of defiance in a quiet cafe. "Next time," Rose said, bringing over fresh scones. "I suppose they'll think twice before causing trouble here." "There won't be a next time," Callum assured her. "Kingsbrook Vale is under proper protection now, both official and unofficial." He glanced at his father, who sat contentedly sipping his tea, the morning sun highlighting the RAF pin on his jacket. Some saw an elderly veteran enjoying his morning routine. Others now knew to see a warrior who had never stopped defending what he believed in. Outside, the town continued its peaceful morning, its residents walking a little taller, breathing a little easier. The shadow had lifted, revealing the strength that had been there all along. Inside Windsor Crown Palace's secure briefing room, Commander Callum Whitmore stood before a panel of senior security officials, presenting the final report on the Atlas security investigation. Maps, photographs, and intelligence assessments covered the walls, telling the story of a conspiracy that had nearly breached royal security. "All identified threats have been neutralized," Callum concluded, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had earned him his position. "Atlas Security's network has been dismantled, their assets frozen, and their personnel are in custody across 3 continents." Sir Malcolm Thornton, head of Royal Security, studied the documents before him. "And the Shadow Riders? This local gang that inadvertently led us to a much larger conspiracy?" "No longer operational," Callum confirmed. "Their leadership is in custody, their properties seized, and their criminal enterprises have been shut down. Kingsbrook Vale is secure." "Thanks in no small part to your father," Sir Malcolm noted, a hint of admiration in his voice. His actions, while unorthodox, proved instrumental in exposing the entire operation. Eve Sinclair, standing beside Callum, added her insights. "The intelligence gathered from the tunnel network has proven invaluable. We've identified similar potential vulnerabilities in other locations and are implementing countermeasures." The briefing continued as Callum detailed the new security protocols being established. Chancellor Blackthorne's testimony had exposed weaknesses in the system that were now being systematically addressed. But even as he spoke, part of his mind was back in Kingsbrook Vale, where his father was undoubtedly enjoying his morning tea at Hawthorne's Haven. After the briefing, Eve caught up with Callum in the corridor. "There's something else you should see," she said, handing him a tablet. "We've been monitoring international chatter since the arrests. Look at this." The screen showed intercepted communications from various criminal organizations. The message was clear. Kingsbrook Vale had been marked as off-limits. The story of what happened to the Shadow Riders had spread through underground channels, becoming something of a cautionary tale. "They're calling it the Veteran's Warning," Eve explained. "Apparently assaulting a 93-year-old war hero and discovering he's the father of a Royal Guard commander has made quite an impression." Callum allowed himself a small smile. Dad would hate that. He never did like being the center of attention. Speaking of attention, Eve swiped to another screen. MI5 wants to award him a civilian commendation for his role in exposing the conspiracy. Something about continuing to serve his country with distinction. "He'll refuse it," Callum said confidently. "He'll say he was just doing what needed to be done." They walked through the palace's historic corridors, their footsteps echoing on marble floors. Royal Guards stood at attention at key positions, their presence more vigilant than ever following the recent events. "The tunnels have been completely sealed," Eve reported as they walked, "though we've archived all of your father's documentation. His knowledge of those old defense networks proved invaluable." "Some weapons never go out of date," Callum quoted his father, including experience. In his office, overlooking the palace grounds, Callum reviewed the final casualty reports from the operation. The Shadow Riders had fallen quickly once their support network crumbled. Doom and the Raven were facing extensive charges, their attempts at plea bargaining complicated by international warrants. His phone buzzed with a message from Flora Hawthorne. "Your father's holding court again." The morning crowd can't get enough of his stories, though he's being very discreet about recent events. Another message followed, this one from Inspector Sterling. "Town council meeting today. Unanimous vote to increase police funding and community engagement programs. Your father's influence at work again." Callum's response was brief, but warm. He always said the best victories are the ones that keep working after the battle's over. Eve entered with another update. "Sir, we've finished processing Atlas Security's files. You were right about their long-term plans. They were positioning assets in multiple countries, planning to create security vulnerabilities they could exploit or sell to the highest bidder. And now? Their entire operation is exposed. Interpol is coordinating with agencies worldwide. The damage they could have caused." She shook her head. All prevented because they made the mistake of threatening one veteran in a small-town café. Callum stood by the window, watching the changing of the guard below. The precision of the ceremony reflected the dedication of those who served, a dedication his father had exemplified throughout his life. "Schedule a car for this afternoon," he instructed Eve. "I believe I'm overdue for tea in Kingsbrook Vale." Later that day, Callum arrived at Hawthorne's Haven to find the cafe buzzing with its usual afternoon crowd. His father sat in his corner booth, surrounded by well-wishers trying not to be too obvious about their admiration. "Causing trouble again, Dad?" Callum asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Thad's eyes twinkled over his teacup. "Just providing perspective. These young people seem to think standing up to a few thugs was remarkable. I told them about the time we had to land a damaged Spitfire in a thunderstorm. That gave them something to think about." Flora appeared with a fresh pot of tea and scones. "Your father's become quite the local celebrity," she told Callum, "though he keeps insisting he's just a regular customer. Regular customers don't usually help expose international criminal conspiracies," Callum pointed out. "No," Thad agreed, straightening his RAF pin. "But they do enjoy a proper cup of tea and good company. The rest is just details." Through the window they could see Kingsbrook Vale going about its business, its streets free from the shadow that had haunted them. Children played without fear, shops operated without intimidation, and the community had rediscovered its strength. "You know," Thad said thoughtfully, "during the war, we didn't fight just to defeat an enemy. We fought to protect a way of life. Simple things, like having tea in peace, watching children play, living without fear." He gestured to the scene outside. "Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones." Callum understood. In his role protecting the crown, he dealt with threats both obvious and subtle. But his father had taught him that true security wasn't just about force or authority. It was about preserving the dignity and peace of ordinary lives. "Besides," Thad added with a slight smile, "I hear they're calling it the Veteran's Warning now. Bit dramatic, don't you think?" "Would you prefer the Tea Shop Rebellion?" Callum suggested innocently. Father and son shared a laugh as Flora brought more tea, and Kingsbrook Vale continued its peaceful afternoon, secure in the knowledge that some guardians worked in uniform, while others simply enjoyed their daily cup of tea. 3 months after the Shadow Riders' downfall, Windsor Crown Palace hummed with activity as preparations for a state visit entered their final phase. Commander Callum Whitmore stood in the Security Control Center, monitoring the enhanced protocols that had emerged from the Atlas security investigation. "All sectors secure," Eve reported, her team coordinating with multiple agencies. "New countermeasures in place. No suspicious activity detected." Callum nodded, studying the array of screens before him. The lessons learned from Kingsbrook Vale had transformed royal security. Hidden vulnerabilities had been identified and eliminated, protocols strengthened, and cooperation between agencies enhanced. His phone buzzed with a message from Thad. "Wish you could see Kingsbrook Vale now." Even the teenagers are saying good morning to police officers. Inspector Sterling says crime rates haven't been this low in decades. A smile tugged at Callum's lips as he typed a response. "Your influence at work again, Dad?" "Just providing perspective," came the reply. "Amazing what a cup of tea and a few war stories can do." Eve approached with a tablet displaying new intelligence. "Sir, you'll want to see this. We've intercepted communications from several organizations that were connected to Atlas Security. They're scrambling, trying to distance themselves from any association with the failed operation." "Good," Callum responded. "Let them run. Makes them easier to track." The screens showed security footage from across London. Royal protection teams moved with heightened awareness, their training incorporating insights gained from the recent crisis. The Shadow Riders' attempt to exploit old military tunnels had led to a comprehensive review of historical infrastructure, closing potential vulnerabilities that had been overlooked for decades. "Commander," a young analyst called out, "update from Interpol. They've arrested 3 more Atlas security executives trying to flee to non-extradition countries. The financial trails you identified led straight to their hideouts." Sir Malcolm Thornton entered the control center, his presence commanding immediate attention. "Excellent work, Commander. The Home Secretary is particularly impressed with how this operation has expanded beyond its original scope. What began as a local incident has unveiled and neutralized threats we didn't even know existed. All thanks to a gang that didn't know who they were dealing with," Eve added, with a slight smile. In Kingsbrook Vale, Thad sat in his usual corner at Hawthorne's Haven, watching the town's transformation through the café window. The Shadow Riders' former clubhouse had been converted into a community center, its walls now decorated with local artwork instead of gang insignia. Flora approached with a newspaper. The headline spoke of Chancellor Blackthorne's conviction and the ongoing international investigation into corruption at multiple levels of government. Smaller articles detailed the positive changes in communities that had once lived under gang intimidation. "Your son's doing well," Flora noted, setting down a fresh pot of tea. "The whole town's proud, you know, having 2 heroes in one family." Thad adjusted his RAF pin, polished to a perfect shine. "We just did what needed doing. Same as in the war. You stand up to bullies, or they never stop." Rose, now promoted to head waitress, joined them with a plate of scones. "Did you hear? They're making a documentary about what happened here called The Veteran's Warning, though they want to interview you, Mr. Whitmore." "Nonsense." Thad waved off the suggestion. "Story's simple enough. Some rough types didn't know their history, made a mess and got cleaned up. Nothing special about that." But the gleam in his eyes suggested he knew better. The events in Kingsbrook Vale had sparked something larger, a reminder that courage often wore unexpected faces, and that some battles were won not with force, but with unwavering principle. Back at Windsor Castle, Callum received another intelligence update. The last fragments of Atlas Security's network were crumbling. Their attempt to breach royal security had instead exposed them completely, leading to the largest international anti-corruption operation in recent history. "Sir," Eve called his attention to a new report. "MI5 has finished their analysis of Chancellor Blackthorne's files. The corruption went deeper than we thought, but his testimony is helping us clean house completely." "And the Shadow Riders' former territories?" "Local police report significant improvements. It seems when you remove fear from a community, people remember their own strength." Callum thought of his father, sitting in his corner booth with his tea and quiet dignity. The man who had taught him that true authority came not from power, but from the principles you served. A secure line buzzed, Thad calling from Hawthorne's Haven. "Dad, everything all right?" "Just fine, son." Thad's voice carried its usual calm. "Though you might want to know, some rough-looking characters passed through town today. Took one look at the cafe, recognized my RAF pin, and decided to have their meeting somewhere else." Callum smiled. "The veteran's warning at work?" "More like common sense finally prevailing," Thad corrected. "Though I admit, it's peaceful here now. Your mother would have liked that." Through the palace windows, Callum could see the changing of the guard, the ceremony representing centuries of tradition and service. His father had served in his way, flying Spitfires against tyranny. Callum served in his, protecting the crown. But both understood that the greatest service was maintaining the peace that allowed ordinary people to live without fear. "Coming for tea this weekend?" Thad asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Callum promised, "though I hope it's less eventful than last time." Father and son shared a quiet laugh, knowing that their victory hadn't just been about defeating criminals or exposing corruption. It had been about protecting the simple dignity of afternoon tea, of communities living in peace, of principles worth defending. As the sun set over Windsor Castle, Callum reflected on how a single act of defiance in a small-town café had rippled outward, changing not just Kingsbrook Vale, but exposing and cleaning corruption at the highest levels. His father had taught him well. Sometimes the most important battles were won not with weapons, but with unwavering conviction and a properly brewed cup of tea. 1 year after the Shadow Riders' fateful mistake, Hawthorne's Haven hosted a quiet celebration. Not of their defeat, as Thad had insisted, but of the community's renewal. The cafe was filled with familiar faces, each carrying their own story of how the town had rediscovered its strength. Commander Callum Whitmore, taking a rare day away from royal protection duties, sat across from his father in their usual corner booth. The wall of photographs had been expanded, now including a discreet image of the day the Shadow Riders left town for the last time, though the real story behind it was known only to a select few. "Did you ever imagine," Flora asked, setting down a special blend of tea she'd created for the occasion, "that one punch would lead to all this?" Thad adjusted his RAF pin, which seemed to shine a bit brighter these days. "In war, you learn that every action has consequences, sometimes small, sometimes..." He gestured to the busy street outside where Kingsbrook Vale thrived in its newfound peace. "Not so small." Inspector Sterling stopped by their table, no longer the nervous local police chief, but a confident leader who had helped rebuild trust between law enforcement and the community. "The Home Office just approved our community policing initiative," he reported proudly. "They're using Kingsbrook Vale as a model for other towns." "Speaking of models," Eve Sinclair added, joining them with her own cup of tea, "Royal Security has completely reimagined its approach thanks to what we learned here. Sometimes the best defense isn't just technology and protocols, it's understanding the value of community." Through the window, they could see the former Shadow Riders clubhouse, now a thriving community center where local youth gathered for activities rather than trouble. The tunnel network beneath the town had been properly sealed, though Thad's detailed maps were safely archived, a testament to how history's lessons could serve the present. Chancellor Blackthorne's final appeal was rejected, Callum mentioned quietly. "The evidence trail you helped expose led to reforms at every level. Atlas Security's attempt to breach royal protection ended up strengthening it instead." "Funny how things work out," Thad mused, sipping his tea. "They thought they were so clever using old war tunnels, studying ancient routes. Never realized they were reading a book written by the very people they underestimated." Rose, now the cafe's manager, brought over a special package. Inside was a framed commendation, not from any official body, but from the people of Kingsbrook Vale themselves. The inscription was simple: "To Thaddeus Whitmore, who reminded us that courage never retires." "Oh, now really?" Thad protested, but his eyes shone with quiet pride. "Accept it, Dad," Callum smiled. "Some victories deserve to be remembered." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the cafe windows, highlighting the peaceful scene. Children played freely in the streets, shopkeepers chatted with customers without fear, and the heavy atmosphere that had once hung over the town was nothing but a fading memory. "You know," Eve observed, checking her tablet one last time before fully joining the celebration, "they still tell the story in certain circles. The Shadow Riders who thought they were hunting, only to discover they were the prey." "The veteran's warning," Inspector Sterling nodded, "though the official reports are considerably more subdued." "As they should be," Thad insisted. "The real story isn't about confrontation. It's about community. About remembering that strength often comes from the most unexpected sources." Callum watched his father, seeing not just the elderly veteran others might notice, but the warrior who had never stopped serving, never stopped protecting. What mattered? The bruise from that fateful punch had long faded, but the lessons it taught had transformed far more than just one small town. "To quiet victories," Callum raised his teacup in a toast. "And proper tea," Thad added with a twinkle in his eye. As evening approached, the café filled with more locals, each bringing their own story of how Kingsbrook Vale had changed. The shadow that had once loomed over them had been replaced by something stronger, a community's rediscovered conviction that some things were worth standing up for no matter the odds. Father and son shared a knowing look, understanding that their greatest victory hadn't been in defeating the Shadow Riders or exposing international corruption. It had been in reminding people that courage came in many forms, that strength often hid in plain sight, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon was simply refusing to back down from what was right. Outside, the sun set on another peaceful day in Kingsbrook Vale, where an old veteran still enjoyed his daily tea, his Royal Guard son still protected the crown, and a small cafe continued to serve as a reminder that some battles were won not with force but with unwavering principle and a properly brewed cup of Earl Grey. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.